Greetings, viewers. EricTheCarGuy here, and thank you very much for tuning in today. And today, well, things go pretty much as you might expect on my channel. I start out intending to do one thing, and well, stuff happens along the way, and I have to overcome them. And what starts out as a simple job ends up being a little more complicated, and that is exactly what happened when I installed the fog lights on my 2003 Honda Pilot. Now, this video does include the installation of those fog lights. In fact, the kit that I installed, well, part of the kit that I installed is very similar to the original equipment setup. But there are two different types of bumpers on this vehicle, as you'll see later on, and that causes an issue. Also, in addition to installing the fog lights, I also spent some time to paint some stuff on the front bumper and everything. But I'm gonna put markers in the video so that if you wanna jump straight to the fog light installation, you can, and skip over all the bumper stuff. Anyway, I'm done talking. Now it's time for you to check out what I put together for you installing fog lights on this 2003 Honda Pilot. Normally there's a splash shield here that you need to remove first, which I would have removed if there was one there when I removed the engine and transmission. Once you remove that lower cover, there's a couple of attachments. There's one right here to the inner fender liner. In fact, this one's bad. I'm going to get a replacement one of those. But you can see one that's complete over here. So there may be some attachments, such as this bolt right here, that go to these that need to come off. Additionally, up in here, there's some 8mm fasteners hidden up under both corners of the front bumper that you're going to need to remove. And then a couple of plastic clips right down here in the front. A little WD-40 helps these clips come apart a little easier. My preferred tool for this is this guy, which I will link in the description. Here's an opportunity to show you exactly what's behind this bumper and this metal clip. You normally wouldn't have access to this, but this gives you a good idea of what you're dealing with on the other side of this bolt. I use a pair of channel locks to hold this clip to get the bolt out after soaking it with some penetrating oil. That may or may not work, but that's the method that I've used over the years that usually gets me where I need to be. And really I'm just saving the bolt because I have a new one of these and the new fender liners come with new clips. Good, it just broke. Wow, that actually came apart. So be happy and surprised if that happens. Penetrating oil, you can sneak in behind with this. Awesome. I'm gonna remove this upper cover now, this inner one. A bunch of plastic clips, hold it on. Pull out on the sides. It's sort of clipped in, so there is a bit of resistance, but just pull straight out. Doesn't look like any collision damage or anything. But there it is, collision damage. So if it's a certified part like this, this isn't an original Honda part. Now the stuff I want to paint is this darker colored stuff. And it looks like it's held on by screws that I can remove, Phillips head screws, same with up here. Looks like this entire inner part. So I remove all those screws. There's a few clips here too. All that stuff so I can get this entire piece off of here. One-time use clips. Looks like there are a few more clips that hold this outer trim piece on. They're like here and here, and I'm just gonna sort of pinch them and push them through. Should release it. Yeah, it just did actually. So that trim piece comes off, and I've got this. This thing is super handy, and I just taped on some foam. Actually, I think this is pipe insulation that I put onto this. Seemed to work well. Try to get these license plate clips out. Don't care if they break because I don't need to put it back on. No more front license plate bracket. Now, like the other upper piece, this is held on by a bunch of screws and a couple of plastic clips. This goes into plastic, so they shouldn't rust out. Like as rusty as that screw is, it still came out because it's plastic. Undo these plastic clips and it should be mine. I'm gonna take these pieces out front since I still have the pressure washer out from earlier and pressure wash this stuff, get all the dirt, grime, and everything off of it. I think I'm gonna do the same to this piece in case I need to go back in and paint this part. This will be all cleaned and ready. This piece, yeah, I'm not too worried about that. I could probably do that by hand. Everything has been pressure washed. I went over everything with compressed air and blew all the water off of it. That actually took a bit of time, but there was an unfortunate incident right there. So as I was pressure washing, whoop, the paint went right away. And it did in these areas also, but I'm not as concerned because there's that lower piece that will go in there. This is smack dab in the middle of the front of the vehicle. Yay, right? I'm gonna come in here with some, I don't know, like 150 grit sandpaper or something like that, just to feather out these edges, because remember, I don't care about the finish of this too much, and honestly, a bumper is something you can swap out pretty easy. Also, I can't forget to talk about the emblem. I removed this, if you hadn't noticed already, before the pressure washing. I was thinking, last time I did this, a viewer suggested I run it through the sandblaster. Well, I did, and it didn't turn out well, and I don't recommend it. It started actually digging in, and not only that, but it took off some of this coating, and I tried to say, well, okay, well, I'll take off all the coating. Well, when I went to do that, it sort of burned right into the plastic, and therefore this emblem's a little messed up. I'm still gonna paint it and install it. Again, this is something that I could get in a salvage yard or something like that and put it on here, paint it whatever color I want. Still, be warned, if you're gonna run this through the sandblaster, you might end up with something you don't want. Now this is just the primer. If I put some clear on that, that might work. But while we're waiting for that to dry, let's go paint this stuff out back. The first coat is a light one. I'll just let that set up, settle in, come back. And this is just the back side of this. I need to flip this over. But we will check back in after I've got everything painted. I think these turned out really well. The emblem, it could be better, honestly, but it's good enough for this. I don't think it's really gonna be an issue. I can always find another one at a salvage yard if I really care. What I really wanted was for this bottom piece to turn out just like it did. Now, with these fog light things sitting next to it, it's not gonna look awkward at all. Now I wanna cut the holes and position the brackets for the fog lights. This is a little more tricky than you might think because nothing really lines up. These here line up because these are supposed to go. That lower piece that goes across here is screwed on, and these brackets are held on by two of those fasteners. However, there are another two fasteners on the outside that you'll see. These are the markings for them. And these are the things that should be there in this area for me to basically locate this template. So I'm gonna fiddle with this for a minute, see if I can get this taped into place and get these two outer holes drilled. We just come in and reinstall this piece. Oh yeah, that looks pretty good. You might have wondered how the incident turned out. Well, this is it right here. It's not perfect. All I did was prime and clear it. All right, and there was all those little screws that were holding these in. I'm not gonna put the screws on the outer ones because, well, I'm gonna put the brackets and the screws in. The kit came with 4 larger screws that are supposed to go into those locations. And I hope they aren't too long because these look pretty long. I'm just gonna try something here. Oh, that's close. I can feel it just pushing against the inside of that. These screws are too long. I'm gonna go get something to remedy that. Got a couple of washers. I don't think they're making contact anymore. I suspect the lower piece is original equipment, but the bumper obviously is aftermarket. So I tried to put a clip in here and I can't get it in there because it won't line up. Gonna go in with my drill and open this hole up so that these two line up. Spend more time messing with crap like this. I'm not sure how well you'll be able to see the marks, but you might just be able to barely see them there. See those little dots and X's? And so are what you're looking for. Like this in particular, looks very much like the template. And I'm just gonna check to see if those line up for the template. After messing around with this for a while, I came to the determination that this fog light kit was never gonna work for my application. Looking through the instructions, you can see how there's like a little extra piece on the side of the bumper that I don't have. And after making my own template and trying to make everything work, I was looking at the front bumper and I could just see that once I fastened the bracket down, it would actually mean that the bezel was going to protrude out the front of the bumper. That wasn't going to work for me. So I am going to use the harness from this fog light kit, but I'm going to get a different set of fog lights to use, and we'll worry about that at a later time. But for now, I put the rest of the bumper back together with some new clips, made sure all the screws and everything were in place, and I think it turned out and looked really good. So now I'm going to mess with something else, and we'll come back to these fog lights in a minute after I find a kit that's going to work a little bit better. Even though I don't have the fog lights yet, I can install the front or under hood wiring harness for the fog lights, and that's what I'm going to do now. You'll notice underneath this headlight, you'll have to really look, but there's a wire back here and it's taped up and it's got a connector on it. That connector is the factory fog light connector. This is the power feed for the front fog lights. At the factory, they pack these with grease to prevent corrosion, which it did a good job of, but the grease is kind of dried up. Little electrical contact cleaner to finish it off. That's better. The fog light kit, the wiring mimics the factory style fog light kit. And you'll find in here on this particular kit, the male connector that goes to this. I think I'm gonna run it right up under the headlight. Yeah, there we go. And I'll worry about tying all that stuff up in a minute. This is for the connector for the left fog light. This one, we recommend mounting or running up through and above the radiator. In addition to the relay, there's also a ground in this harness, which I'm going to hook right here where the body ground goes. The new set of fog lights I ordered is in, and they came with new brackets. And guess what? These brackets will work. Check that out. So put these where the old brackets were, but look at where this lands as opposed to where the other ones did. So these are the ones for this vehicle. So this one will work on this bumper. I'm very happy to have found that. However, what they sent for the outer covers was this gray color. You might recall that I spent a lot of time and effort to paint this black so that it would match the black color. Well, now they're gray. So I'm just going to paint these the same color black. No big deal, but it's just an extra step that I'm going to need to do. The good news with all of this is I'm going to have spare fog lights in case one of them gets damaged in some way. Not only will these work on the Pilot, but I believe these are also the same fog lights that work on the Element as well. And I've got two Elements with fog lights, so I'm pretty well set with fog lights for a minute. One of these arrived with a few scratches on it. I'm not too worried about it, but well, you might consider sanding that down a little bit if you are concerned about it. As I said, I'm not. I started things with prep spray to make sure that all the grease and any oils or anything that might have been on that plastic has gone away before I paint. This is a relay that came in the kit. There are two, they're exactly the same. Doesn't really matter which one you use. But it plugs in here. There's also a fuse here that attach to a bracket. Now this bracket, you remove this fastener and you mount this bracket here, which I'm about to do now. And this will allow you to attach the relay as well as that fuse that I just showed you. There are screws in the kit, and one of them screws into here, and that's where the relay will go. And I ran all this under this wiring around the airbox. Fuse can come up and clip right here. Put it on the right way. The fuse can come up and clip right here. That should clip there, but kind of doesn't. What do you do in this situation? Of course, a zip tie. All right, get to the fuse. This is the power feed for the fog lights. This piece here, this little pigtail that goes into this connector, is actually a fusible link. So this is a piece of wire that acts like a fuse. Now, I thought about trimming this down and hooking it into this terminal, but I think it's actually going to be just as easy just to take that opening and put it on the battery terminal, which if you're not using the battery terminals I'm using, I'm sure this would go right onto the positive battery cable terminal, no problem. Well, in the process of trying to drill the eyelet out larger, I broke it. So I stripped off the insulation. I'm just going to insert this into the battery terminal. It just needs to go to the positive battery. Continuing with the fog light installation, this is the in-vehicle harness. There is another relay, as I mentioned. Let's see if we can't find out. Okay, this white connector here is where the relay goes. There's also a bracket that we're going to hook up under the dash. So that relay's ready. This connector, I believe, yeah, this connector is for the switch. So this is the one you've got to route under there, and you've got to do like a couple of bypasses underneath the dash, which I'll show you now. Previously, I had already removed this trim piece here and also this trim piece here. Both of these need to be removed. This is where the fog light switch will end up being. I'm just gonna pop out the cover. So now we have an opening for the switch. You can discard that, stick it in your glove box, whatever. Now the fun part. There is, I hope you can see a 20-pin connector right here. That needs to be unplugged. And by the way, it's probably not a bad idea to disconnect your battery when you do this, just to avoid any issues. Okay, so that 20-pin is disconnected. Then there is, in the harness, this one that comes in, sort of interrupts it. So this other end of the 20-pin connector goes in here. If at first you don't succeed, turn it around. Then you'll see this 2-pin connector, which goes into, there's a, underneath that 20-pin connector, there's a place for it. So right there, underneath the 20-pin. So that one connects right there. Then there's just 2 more connectors. There's this blue one and this gray one. And they go into the fuse box. So, but there are 2 open slots. There's one in the top and there's one in the bottom. And I believe the blue one goes in the bottom, yeah. And the gray one will go in the top. Now, the instructions said something about daylight mirror or something of that nature that you might have to mess with. So see the instructions on that. Then the only thing left is the switch connector, and that gets routed up through the dash. That's how everything pretty much gets connected under there. I'm going to go back in here and connect everything properly, tidy it up, and then we'll come back when I install the switch. I've got everything connected, and I plugged the switch in. I also came out in the front of the vehicle and plugged in the fog lights, or plugged in a couple of fog lights to check them. Because of the way things are wired now, the headlights need to be on. So in order to use the fog lights, the headlights have to be on. Now, I should hear some relays click when I press this button and see some lights come on. And I do. There's one more thing about having them wired up this way, and that is when the brights come on, the fog light should go off. And it's designed to do that. That's actually a safety regulation in some states that it has to be wired up that way. And now it is. With headlights off, the fog lights also turn off. Or they should, yeah. Cool, let's tidy it up and put the front bumper on. I had a heck of a time with this switch. This switch does not go into this opening like it's supposed to. I had to go in and modify it. I had to grind some of the stuff out, but I finally got it to where it would actually work and stay put. So now it works, and it's very fragile, but I'm just going to be very, very careful with this. Anyway, know that the switch for this particular kit is garbage and you may have to modify it. And by the way, this whole piece here comes out so that I could work with it on the bench. I didn't have to do anything in the dash, which would have sucked. One zip tie
did it for me. I just grabbed all the wires and zip tied them up to that. I found a stud up in here that was a great place to mount the relay. They gave me a 10 millimeter nut that I could use, and well, it seems to be living quite happily there. So everything is up and out of the way. The idea is that you don't want any wires or anything falling down onto your feet while you're driving. Super dangerous, so avoid that. Anyhow, all of that's together, so now it's just a matter of cutting holes in the bumper and remounting it. When all is said and done, this cover will live right about in this area. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because the only thing that's really going to matter is the opening that the fog light passes through. So long as you're not larger than this piece, you're pretty good. Now, there are markings, as I mentioned, on the inside that I'm going to try to follow. But just to give you a general idea of what you're doing, you just need to stay underneath this plastic. It doesn't need to be exactly perfect as far as your cuts go, because they'll be masked by this. Now, the reason I mention this is because the template that I had before is pretty much junk, but I can barely see some markings in here, which I'm going to go in with my marker and try to make definitive, let's say. And I'm going to do that on both sides so that I can cut the openings. This light will help me get a little bit better contrast. You can sort of see where the holes they wanted you to drill for here and here. And they do that so that you can get a nice radius edge here when you do your cutting. So if you drilled those holes, you would catch this radius edge just fine. And then basically you go in and connect the dots from there. That's the opening for that side. I think that takes care of that side. I'm going to cheat this a little bit and use a unibit, because I'm going to use a body saw to cut this out, but I can't just go in and start cutting. I've got to start with some type of opening for the saw to go into. And I'm actually thinking about going into these corners and hitting these radiuses so that I can do somewhat what they wanted you to do in the beginning, which was basically connect the dots as far as the holes are concerned. Body saw sort of melts it back together. I'm going to use this half round file to smooth out the edges a little bit. There are two holes that need to be drilled in this area. I almost think I have, well, markings for them, but I'm going to ignore those and use the bracket itself, because two screws that hold the bracket on go through here. Okay, now I need two holes right where the bracket goes, here and here. Yeah, I can clearly see where those holes go. Now the instructions say to drill these holes from the outside in, and they say to start with a 3 millimeter bit and finish with a 9 millimeter bit. I'm going to drill the first hole through the back because I can see where it goes through. They talk about using a push pin to push through the bumper, and that way you can mark it through the other side. I'm just going to do it this way. I'm going to go through the back, and then for the final drilling I'll go through the opposite direction. Now, if you're wondering why those holes are so large, it's because they give you these spacers that are supposed to be sandwiched in between the bumper and the bracket. And the reason you want this is because if you tighten these down without these little spacers in here, that will deform the plastic on the bumper, and possibly you might see that on the outside. So that's why these. They said a 9 millimeter bit, but I'm using 23/64 is what I use. And then I use one about half that size for the other side. So there's some black screws, and I'm putting the spacer in there. It almost feels like these screws could use a washer. So instead I'm going to do it like this. Screw, washer, then spacer. This side went in so much better than the other side. Here's that side for comparison. I can now reinstall the front bumper. I do not want to forget to install the styrofoam piece, which I just put on here.
Now, when I install this bumper, I'm going to try to feed these plugs through those openings or get them close to those openings so that they're easy to get to. But we're going to install the bumper before I install the fog lights. The important thing to watch for is making sure you get this into the groove before pushing it back and in. It clips in up here. Also, don't forget there's a screw that goes in up this way on both sides. In here is the adjuster for the fog lights. And on the other set of brackets that I got, this was already installed. In this new set, it's not. So I have to start with a little plastic insert into this opening for the screw to go into. Then the screw and a spring for the adjustment. The new fog light will hook into it. There's a clip here for the fog light connector right there, that part, so you can have something of a strain relief by hooking it in like that. There are also two screw holes that are left that these upper mounts go into. The one on the right side here, you can actually start the screw so you can sort of hook this on here and hook it onto the adjuster and then just run the last screw in. The fog light is installed, but we're not done. I'm not going to put the outer cover on until I've aimed them, because in order to aim them, you've got to adjust this screw here, and you turn it in to help it go down and you turn it out for it to go up. Once you've got them aimed, I'll show you the next part. I made an interesting discovery with this new fog light kit. It had these two small pieces of metal, and I was like, what the heck are these things for? And then I was like, hey, wait a minute. There were a couple of bosses on the insides of these things, and I wonder if these go there, and they do, and they will clip into the bumper on the top, and then the screws will go into the bottom. And to attach these, looks like they gave me some of these speed nuts. Try to find the right screws, because these screws in this kit are way cheaper. I know that these are going to rust to nothing very quickly. And I believe the bracket should go on like this so that they can clip in. Well, maybe it's not these screws because they're not grabbing at all. But at least I have the part that I need. It came down to finding the right screws, which I did. But these are super cheap, and you'll probably have to make do in some way like I just did. All right, I've done the what I believe to be the final alignment on these fog lights. Got our clips installed on the covers, and now it's just a matter of installing those clips. I gotta see if I can get these lined up. It's installed, but there's a little gap under here, so that's not exactly right. Not that you'll really see that, but this set of fog lights is challenging, to say the least. They look okay, but they just don't fit great. You might have wondered how the paint worked out on that one that was a little messed up. This is that one. I'm calling it done. Now, before I installed that final trim piece on the outside there, I adjusted the fog lights, as I mentioned earlier in the video. And I did that by turning the lower attachment to the fog lights, the spring-loaded screw that was there, and that will allow you to adjust the fog lights up or down. Now, I adjusted mine so they came in underneath the headlights and were pretty much parallel with the road, was kind of what I was going for. I also went back in and installed some LED amber bulbs. Personally, I prefer amber bulbs in my fog lights. I think they reflect the light less back at you, less than white light does, like say in snow or something like that. Personal preference, you can do whatever you want. But I think the main takeaway from this is if you are installing a fog light kit on an older Pilot like this one, make sure you get the correct one, because as I pointed out in the video, there are two different types of front bumpers for this, and that caused me a lot of problems. Now, the thing that I did like about the original kit was the wiring harness, which pretty much mimics the factory wiring harness. So if you were installing a factory fog light kit for this, it would be very, very similar to that, if not almost identical to it. So that part of it I liked. In fact, that's why I got the kit. But when it came out here, like I said, that's where all the trouble started. And that was, well, pretty difficult and challenging to figure out, okay, there are two different types of bumpers and all that stuff. Also, when attaching those brackets, don't go by the little marks they have on the bumper. mount the bracket, and then mark the holes. The one side that didn't fit so well, I used the holes that were marked on the bumper, but the one side that fit really well, those were the holes that I made according to the bracket. That worked out a lot better. I will put links in the description to parts, tools, additional information, anything to try to help you along with this job if this is what you're looking to do. I hope you like the way my bumper turned out. I think that turned out great. I will also put a link in the description to EricTheCarGuy.com, which is where I ask you to go if you have automotive questions that I didn't cover here. Other than that, remember that I post videos on Fridays, so be sure to stop back and see me then. Also, don't forget to hit subscribe and notifications so you know when I post new videos. That was Friday if you missed that. Be safe, have fun, stay dirty. I will see you next time. Thank you very much for watching.